We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Well, later today I'll be meeting with the Orkney-based company Scott Renewables Tidal Power, who I'm delighted to announce have finalised details for an international investment package of over £7 million in the company that will allow them to finance the design, construction, installation and testing of their new generation tidal turbine. I know that the whole Chamber will wish to welcome this substantial vote of confidence in Scotland's offshore renewable industry.
Joanne Lamont.
Can I thank the First Minister for that reply? Last week, the Scotsman reported that the European Commission had written a letter making it clear that an independent Scotland would have to apply to the European Union to be members. Nicola Sturgeon's spokesperson accused the paper of fabricating the story. Indeed, the First Minister said they had been, and I quote, duped by anti-independence people. The paper was even forced to print a partial apology. Now, we know the story is true. A fortnight ago, I asked the First Minister when did he last complain to a newspaper about its coverage, and he answered me with an email today at 11:19. Does he now need to update that answer, and would he now like to apologise to the Scotsman?
First Minister.
I'm sure the Scotsman corrected the story because they implied that a letter had been sent when the Commission said that no such letter had been sent. That was the position. I suppose a more interesting argument might be how the Scotsman got sight of a letter which hadn't actually been sent by the President of the European Commission, and no doubt will be enlightened in the columns of the Scotsman newspaper to arrive at that conclusion. I'm sorry that Joanne Lamont doesn't appreciate me trying to answer her questions. I'll try not to write to her and explain when the last time I complained to a newspaper was, but if I remember correctly, the Herald published a correction. I actually think it's a good idea to publish corrections when mistakes are made. No doubt at some point Joanne Lamont will apologise and publish corrections for the many factual errors she brings to this Chamber.
Joanne Lamont.
I've been in this job nearly a year. I've worked out that you don't intend answering questions very often at all. And secondly, just keeping saying something doesn't make it true. And the problem for the First Minister about the letter is that his defence seemed to be that it wasn't sent. Well, we all know it's been sent now, and he has to deal with what that letter actually says. Because, of course, Nicola Sturgeon told his Parliament in 2007, and I quote, Scotland would automatically be a member of the European Union upon independence. There is legal opinion to back that up. Now, not only do we now know that to be untrue, it now transpires that she hadn't even asked for the legal advice which allowed her to make that assertion. But of course, this ministerial habit of assertion is viral. On Tuesday, John Swinney told the House of Lords he had been having a very helpful dialogue with the Bank of England on keeping the pound after independence. And what does the bank say? They say, and I quote, "We have not entered a dialogue."
Order.
So what does it say about the Scottish Government when the people of Scotland have to go to the European Commission and to the Bank of England to hear the truth?
First Minister.
I think there were perhaps 3 points in that question. Firstly, the letter hadn't been sent last week. That much is clear. Therefore, to suggest it had been sent was clearly wrong. Secondly, Joanne Lamont says that there is no legal opinion which supports the SNP position on continuing membership. There is ample legal opinion from a range of sources which have been cited. Well, Emile Noël, the former Secretary-General of the European Commission, Lord Mackenzie Stewart, a range of quotes which have been brought to this Chamber.
Order.
Incidentally, I see that Aidan Neil QC says that's a respectable argument in his blog published last night. So there's plenty of legal opinion which supports that position. And lastly,
Order.
In terms of Joanne Lamont and the Bank of England, she's come along to this chamber in a number of occasions, but I remember one specifically in the 31st of May, and told me there hadn't been discussions with the Bank of England. I rather helpfully, because the Bank of England had asked for confidence in these matters, and I respect that, pointed out that I'd met the Governor of the Bank of England on the 16th of February. I told her that in May. The SNP government have pointed out, and I quote exactly, as indicated by Mr Swinney, the Scottish Government is engaged with the Bank of England to discuss factual and technical matters around proposals for a macroeconomic framework. That is exactly what has happened. The Bank of England does not clearly take a position on the question of independence for Scotland. That's not its job. But the Bank of England has responded, as it should do as a public body, to requests for factual information, and has engaged with the Fiscal Commission, which, if I could remind the Labour Party, has eminent economists, including 2 Nobel laureates, in terms of preparing Scotland's position. Well, I think actually to get a Nobel laureate in economics is quite an important thing, which should not be derided by the Labour Party. So these preparations I've made.
Order.
The SNP government engage with those who are willing to engage in discussions. We've engaged in the factual information requested from the Bank of England. We are prepared to engage with the President of the European Commission, as the Deputy First Minister has made clear. And we would engage with the UK Government to discuss these matters, but Department after Department have refused to engage in such discussions. So perhaps Joanne Lamont will help us in, just for a change, disagreeing with our Tory allies, and suggest the United Kingdom Government now engage in the discussions that this Government is perfectly prepared to enter into.
Joanne Lamont.
Well, I suppose in the fantasy world that the First Minister now inhabits, that meant a stout defence of his position. Because his problem is, he claims that he wants to have dialogue with all of these people, but asserted we would be in Europe, we would be part of a sterling zone, without ever asking anybody, without ever having a conversation. And when Mr Swinney goes to London, he says we're having a dialogue, and the Bank of England says not. Bank of England says not. I'm not sure if they're suggesting if the Bank of Scotland is actually being misleading. Maybe we can clarify that later. But if we, of course, can go back to that interview when the First Minister said he had sought legal advice from the law officers when he hadn't. Andrew Neil, we remember, didn't just ask him about that. He asked him, can we clarify whether an independent Scotland would have to reapply for membership of the EU? Alex Salmond said, well, no, we wouldn't. But although we do have to bear in mind that this was the same interview in which the First Minister's words, yes, we have, meant no, we haven't, in terms of the debate. Now, the man in charge of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso, has told the BBC, if there is a new state, of course that state has to apply for membership. What part of that statement does the First Minister not understand?
First Minister.
I'm trying to remember the start of that question, but I think it started. It started on the question of the Bank of England. The Bank of England, as is perfectly proper, has agreed to engage with the Scottish Government for technical advice with the Fiscal Commission. That is a perfectly proper thing for the Bank of England to do. It doesn't take a public position on the debate on Scottish independence. It has no reason to take such a public position. You wouldn't expect it to be such a public position. And the Governor of the Bank of England has been perfectly proper in providing the resource for the technical advice which has been requested by the Fiscal Commission and engage with the Fiscal Commission once it's established. That seems to be a perfectly reasonable position for the Bank of England to take, and I hope that will now extend to UK Government departments so they take a similarly wise position. The Scottish National Party government have never argued that we don't have to negotiate our position in terms of the European Union. I remember a question from Patricia Ferguson on the 25th of January, which says on the publication of a consultation document in January that we had changed our position to say that there would be negotiations. I pointed out to her on the 25th of January I say it's never been our position that there would not be negotiations. The point is negotiations would be held from within the context of the European Union. And therefore, it was with some surprise that I saw a press release from Patricia Ferguson last Friday, which repeated the suggestion that saying there would be negotiations was a change in the government's position. We've maintained that there would be negotiations on the question of Scotland's position within the European Union. The point is, we've said, and is absolutely unambiguously the case, that these negotiations will take place from within the context of the European Union. That is exactly.
Order.
Well, I can quote a variety of Labour MPs, MEPs, who accept that Scotland would not be excluded from the European Union. No serious person actually believes that to be the case. And it's not the case, of course, because not just is it in the interests of Scotland to be a member of the European Union, it's overwhelmingly in the interests of the European Union to have Scotland as a member.
Joanne Lamont.
The First Minister really has to reflect that the President of the European Commission may have some authority in this matter, on balance. And he has said a new state would have to apply, and I had thought that the SNP backbenchers and indeed the frontbenchers, their aspiration was for Scotland to be a new state. Otherwise, what is the point of what we're going to be debating for the next 2 years? Now, I don't want to dwell on private grief, but I would say to the First Minister, does he not realise he's a bit of a credibility problem when he comes to this Parliament and gives an answer he describes as exact an answer as anybody has given in any Parliament, and a few hours later he has to admit he was entirely wrong? Does he not see that when he says he has sought legal advice when he hasn't, people doubt the next words which come out of his mouth? When his Finance Secretary says he's in dialogue with the Bank of England and the bank say they are not, what does that say about his government? Isn't it the truth that John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond, all of them are not leading Scotland, they are misleading Scotland?
First Minister. Order.
As I explained at our meeting, the Bank is committed to impartiality in that debate. We will, of course, respond to requests from the UK and Scottish Governments for technical advice, on condition that such advice is provided in strict confidence. The Bank will have no...
Order.
The Bank will have no public position in the debate. Consistent with that, the Bank will engage with the Fiscal Commission that you have established. That's a letter from the Governor of the Bank of England, the 19th of March this year. That's exactly consistent with the position that the Scottish Government have put forward. And I would have thought, when I did suggest to Joanne Lamont, without in any way breaching the confidentiality request that was given by the Governor, that I'd met the Governor in February of this year, she might have come to the conclusion that that engagement that the Governor speaks about was going on. That was the purpose of it. It is entirely reasonable for the Scottish Government to seek to engage with important authorities in terms of preparing the ground for the independence referendum and, in particular, the White Paper of next autumn. It is not unreasonable for the Labour Party, which traditionally had the occasional difference with the Conservative Party, to say it would be a good idea for UK Government departments to make preparations. Why is it not an unreasonable position? Because the Scottish Select Committee, which is Labour Party dominated, suggested that the Ministry of Defence should do exactly that. The point is, we are perfectly prepared to engage, perfectly prepared to prepare the ground for the White Paper, perfectly prepared to rebut the scaremongering of the Labour Party on each and every occasion, and we stand on the ground that the country, with 90% of the oil reserves of the European Union, of 25% of the potential renewable energy reserves, the second largest gas provider in the European Union, with 60% of the territorial waters of these islands, is something that no serious person across this continent would try to exclude from the European Union.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank the First Minister for his answer. I also listened with interest to the Cabinet Secretary's performance at the House of Lords Economic Committee, particularly when he said that the Scottish Government had held informal dialogue with the European Commission about an independent Scotland's entry into the EU. The Scottish Conservatives revealed earlier this year that both the EU's Enlargement Commissioner, Stefan Füle, and President Barroso confirmed in writing that by March there had been no discussions on this subject with the SNP government. So, can the First Minister tell the people of Scotland what talks John Swinney was referring to? When, since March, did they take place? Who conducted them, and at what level? What ground was covered? And if we were to contact Europe, would we get the same answer as he's about to give?
First Minister.
The Scottish Government ministers meet European commissioners on a regular basis, and informal dialogue takes place with these European commissioners across a range of subjects, as we meet at official level as well. Can I say to Ruth Davidson that there have been few, if any, people I've met across the world over the last few months who haven't asked me about the question of Scottish independence. Scotland is actually attracting a huge amount of interest in international terms. Now, I know that is not the favoured position of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party would like to be in a position where nobody was interested in Scotland, or would like to put forward a position that nobody should be interested in Scotland. But Scotland is a subject of great interest. Scottish Government ministers will talk in informal terms with the European commissioners and anyone else in terms of explaining why Scotland should be an independent country.
Ruth Davidson.
Can I gently remind the First Minister that he's here to give straight answers to straight questions, and that the people of Scotland deserve honest answers? The First Minister can't or won't or seems unwilling to tell us something as straightforward as precisely what discussions have been going on, if indeed any have at all. This all just kind of adds to quite an unedifying week in which first the First Minister and then the Finance Secretary were spanked and sent to bed by President Barroso and the Bank of England for not doing their homework properly. And now in a panic, the health girl, Nicola Sturgeon, is being dispatched to Brussels to sort this mess out. But can I ask the First Minister, does Brussels share his sense of urgency? Can he tell us who has agreed to meet the Deputy First Minister, when these meetings are due to take place, and what questions she's due to ask?
First Minister.
Well, can I say that it's not been unknown for politicians in these islands to have disagreements with the President of the European Commission. David Cameron said yesterday, "I don't agree with President Barroso at Prime Minister's questions." That seemed to me a perfectly reasonable statement. The only problem was he was agreeing with Bill Cash when he was disagreeing with President Barroso. Does she not understand that Conservative politicians have been disagreeing with President Barroso for most of the last 2 years? And the reason is that the Conservative Party, a substantial section of it, want to leave the European Union now. A substantial other section of it want to have negotiations, and then we're told the Prime Minister will be announcing an in-out referendum after these negotiations. Apparently he's going to do that next month, but then of course he said he was going to do that last January, if I remember correctly. And therefore, doesn't it come to the conclusion that the only substantial threat to Scotland's position as a European Union nation is from the Conservative Party, with its undying hostility to anything European, and who are preparing a substantial section of it for Scotland's exit from the European Union? And if that is the feeling within her party, I can tell Ruth Davidson the amount of influence that she has over the London direction of the Conservative Party is next to zero. So it ill behoves a representative of a Eurosceptical party to come to this chamber and cast questions on Scotland's credentials as a European nation.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
As this government has finally admitted that it will need to negotiate Scotland's membership of the European Union, can he tell me, before the referendum, whether the voters will know what we could lose in those negotiations?
First Minister.
Well, what voters in Scotland lose is having Liberals propping up a Conservative Party in government.
Willie Rennie.
Well, that was a rather comprehensive answer that I wasn't expecting.
Order.
The First Minister doesn't seem to understand that this is not about membership, it's about the terms. And I'm surprised that the First Minister doesn't seem to understand that very simple point. This is about the politics of other countries. And he seems to think that all 27 members of the European Union will just sign up to whatever he wants. So now, as people doubt what he says, they doubt what he says whether the First Minister likes it or not. They want to know before the referendum what they might lose. So can he tell me when he plans to meet with the 27 members of the European Union to discuss Scotland's membership and to establish what they will want in return?
First Minister.
Well, actually, Willie Rennie, and I think in contrast to the previous two party leaders, has actually put his finger on something important. He's not questioning the fact that Scotland will be a member of the European Union, but taking the debate on to the negotiations. Now, I already pointed out to the Labour Party the answer I gave Patricia Ferguson earlier this year. But can I say to Willie Rennie that when he's talked about terms in the past, he has actually stated that Scotland could be forced to adopt the euro. That's one of the key aspects. Well, I've got a number of quotes that you think... Well, you're not disagreeing. You're shaking your head, but you weren't disagreeing. I see. I tried to explain that. I pointed out you're a Liberal Democrat. It was the Democrats rather... I tried to point out that under the circumstances that we envisage of Scotland's continuing membership, then of course we'd inherit the opt-out position. But even if that weren't the case, it doesn't follow at all that we'd be forced into the euro. And if he wants an explanation of that, then I suggest he looks at the Scotsman newspaper, since it's been quoted so extensively by Joanne Lamont, and the article today from Daniel Keneally of the Politics and International Relations Department at the University of Edinburgh. And he goes through the whole range of European debate. But he exactly points out there is one point, he says, which is virtually beyond argument. I'll quote him exactly. Just one opt-out must be discussed here briefly, and that is the euro opt-out. The euro is a genuine example of scaremongering within this debate. The notion that Scotland could be forced or compelled to adopt the euro is simply untrue. Now, I think it ill behoves the politician in this chamber who was most in favour of the euro just a few years ago in the terms of this...
Order!
When Willie Rennie became Chief Executive of the Scottish Liberal Party just a few years ago, he said that Scotland would be leading the Yes campaign for the euro. The Yes campaign that's going to take place is the Yes campaign for an independent Scotland. But for a Liberal Democrat to scaremonger over the euro defies not just the past record of that party, but is reducing the debate to a level worthy of a party which has 5 members. So if Willie Rennie will, in the words, accept that is scaremongering, as he's suggested, to suggest that Scotland could be forced into the euro, then perhaps we can get the debate onto a level that I know the Liberal Democrats would really like to have.
Question number 4, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the First Minister what impact the Scottish Government expects the additional capital resources announced in the autumn statement will have on Scottish employment.
First Minister.
Well, the Chancellor, through the recent autumn statement announcement, has finally heeded the calls of the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly Government, the Northern Irish Assembly Government calls to boost capital spending. That comes after 4 years of pressure, 15 calls on 2 United Kingdom governments, 8 letters to the Chancellor and 2 joint declarations with the devolved administrations in this year alone, a substantial degree of engagement. The steps that have been taken are welcome, but they only take us halfway towards the common sense in terms of investment. There is still a lack of coherent plan in London to return the economy to growth. The additional capital funding of £394 million in total over 3 years is expected to boost jobs and growth in Scotland. For example, the additional £160 million will support 2,000 jobs in that year. But as I am sure is well understood by Kenneth Gibson, that is only a partial return to the capital spending levels that were expected historically.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. Does he agree that the belated Treasury decision to heed Scottish Government calls to reverse capital spending cuts could and should have come much sooner, making yesterday's positive news on unemployment even better, news opposition party leaders today ignored? And can he advise the Chamber how many more people currently unemployed in Scotland could be in work with the UK Government to restore the full 26% cut to our capital budget that it continues to impose on this Parliament?
First Minister.
Well, it's true that you try to anticipate what questions might be asked at First Minister's question. And one iron law is that if unemployment in Scotland is falling, then it won't be mentioned by any of the opposition parties in this chamber. Kenny Gibson is absolutely right. The savage cuts in the capital budget have been a major reason for weakness in the economy. We are delighted and pleased that there has been a partial resumption of a capital spending profile. It is only half of what we believe is needed over the next year and only returns us to a position of some 25% reduction in real terms. However, if the Conservative Party and its Liberal Democrat allies in London now agree that direct capital investment is essential for economic growth, then perhaps they will realise, having taken the first faltering steps, that more should follow so that economic growth in this country can resume.
Question 5, Ken McIntosh.
To ask the First Minister, in light of reported comments by the Chair of the Independent Fiscal Commission, Sir Crawford Beveridge, what the Scottish Government's position is on fiscal control and financial regulation in the event of Scotland separating from the rest of the UK.
First Minister.
Well, any system put in place is one that takes logical precautions against the problems of excessive indebtedness, poor fiscal controls and lax regulation that cause many of the problems that the global economy now faces. It is clear, therefore, that we should not make the same mistakes as the previous UK Government with the ill-fated promise to end boom and bust, which ended with the greatest recession since the 1930s. Under independence, control over the key economic and fiscal levers would be brought home to Scotland, providing opportunities to boost growth and to tackle inequality. We are, as is now, I think, generally agreed, in a stronger relative fiscal position in the UK, to the tune of £2.7 billion, according to the latest official statistics. The Fiscal Commission Working Group, to which I referred earlier, will publish their first set of findings and recommendations in the new year. I look forward to seeing that output.
Ken McIntosh.
Can I thank the First Minister for his answer? Now, can I ask him just to clarify one point, and that is whether or not Scotland's future will be supported by, in an independent Scotland, by a fiscal stability pact. Just ask him to clarify 2 quotes. One is from an interview with Andrew Neil in March 2012, the same interview, of course, in which Mr Salmond said that a prerequisite for a functioning sterling area would be a fiscal stability pact. And he followed that up in September 2012 in a lecture in Chicago, answering a question when he said there would be no need for a fiscal stabilisation pact. Can I ask the First Minister to clarify which option is his preferred?
Well, I said no such thing in Chicago. I pointed out in Chicago that looking at the GERS figures, if you had a borrowing limit arrangement with the Bank of England and the Treasury in that year, then we'd be £2.7 billion relatively better off than the UK fiscal position, a point that's been confirmed by the Institute of Fiscal Studies in recent weeks. Now, £2.7 billion seems to me to give you a degree of flexibility which is not there in the United Kingdom at the present moment. It means you could borrow less and spend more and save for the future, or any combination of the three. Just to bring it down to everyday levels for the the benefit of everyone. £2.7 billion is about £500 a head for every man, woman and child in Scotland. I think lots of people looking at the economic disaster visited upon this country by the Labour Party and then taken forward by the Conservative Party, looking at the levels of poverty and deprivation in Scotland, looking at the lack of growth in this economy, would say that some part of that £2.7 billion should be invested in the economy, and people will be wondering why Ken McIntosh doesn't seem to think that this country uniquely should not have the benefit of its own resources.
Question number 6, Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the legalisation of drugs, given the potential impact on its justice and health policies.
First Minister.
You know, in terms of the drugs debate, I think two things are really important. One is to recognise the huge, serious problem that Scotland has faced and still faces to an extraordinary degree. But it's also important that we recognise within the recent statistics there is some signs of improvement. In self-reported drug use amongst the general adult population has fallen since 2006 from 12.6% to 9.1% among 16 to 59-year-olds reporting in the last year's Scottish Crime and Justice Survey. The drug use report published shows that drug taking among young people is at its lowest level since 2002, and among 15-year-olds reporting drug use in the last month, and that's from the Scottish Schools Adolescent Lifestyle and Use Survey. So therefore we should take an overall approach to tackling drug use in Scotland as set out in the National Drug Strategy, The Road to Recovery, which focuses on prevention, enforcement, treatment and recovery. And I would commend us to pursue that across this chamber and see these early signs of success, not for a reason for complacency, but certainly something we should continue to do and command the support of the chamber to do.
Thank you very much, First Minister. While welcoming the fall in addiction, nevertheless it remains a substantial source of social problems. In relation to enforcement, does the First Minister see merit, as I do, among all other existing measures, of commissioning research into the potential impact of decriminalising drug usage? And I stress decriminalising, not legalising.
First Minister.
Well, we share information, analysis and evidence. We should always do so, and we should always look at that evidence and see what's justified. The position that we've taken, I think, is the right one, and I think we should pursue. Of course, we should look at evidence, and that's what we'll do. But the position that we're currently on and the trajectory we're currently on does have the substantial advantage that it commands cross-party support across this chamber, and I believe that is the course. That course is the one which we should continue to pursue, concentrating on the points made out in the Road to Recovery programme, recognising the indications of some success, as well as accepting the overweening nature of the drugs problem in Scotland. The last point I make to Christine Graham, that if we consider Scotland's relationship with alcohol and the measures we've taken and have to take and pursue in terms of trying to address that imbalance, it is the case that alcohol as a legal substance doesn't mean that you remove yourself from the extraordinary problems of abuse of that substance. And I think she should beware of seeing within a change in the law a solution to these matters. So we'll look at the evidence, but I believe the balance of that evidence says that the approach we are currently taking is the right one.
That concludes First Minister's questions. Members, a point of order. Ken McIntosh.
I'm sure that all of us would not wish to drag the First Minister back here at the end of the day to correct himself, so perhaps I can offer this opportunity here and now. In reply to my question earlier, the First Minister did not respond to whether he supported a fiscal stability pact or otherwise, but he specifically said that my quote was incorrect. He said no such thing in Chicago. Can I just read the full quote? I don't believe that a monetary policy restriction would have to have a fiscal stabilisation pact. I think we can have plenty of room for manoeuvre within a currency union. That's as quoted by Tom Gordon in the Sunday Herald on the 30th of September. Can I just ask, through your offices, Presiding Officer, whether or not the First Minister made such a statement?
With reference to the point of order, Mr McIntosh well knows that's not a matter for me, it's a matter for the First Minister. That concludes First Minister's question. If members could just resume their seats. Your business managers will have already told you that there is a planned evacuation now of the debating chamber, and I suspend this meeting until 1:45.